Welcome everyone to S.U.N Sustainable Urban Network.
Sustainable Urban Network.
Hi, I'm Sonja Robinson. Tune in to S.U.N Sustainable Urban Network, where we all shine together. The guests are hot, and the topics make the mic drop.
S.U.N back to new chapter. Justice now, not after. Clean energy matters. Fossil fuel not flatter. Rooftop solar in the mix is really good for the streets. Electricity needs a big rate relief. We gon' keep it pushing, everything on the sun. Watch the show, we gonna have some fun. Walk the talk if you official, proceed to run. 2020 inequity, where the tons
All right, thank you everyone. So, welcome to S.U.N Sustainable Urban Network. Happy S.U.N Saturday. You could be anywhere, and we appreciate that you're joining in, tuning in, and listening to this very important topic throughout San Diego County. I have a fabulous guest. We're going to be talking about community-owned utilities, public power, how we, the people, and our voice and our vote can literally change the trajectory of how and where we actually get and own our power, our utilities, our infrastructure, and how we can actually control our rates. And so as we do on all of our shows, I'm going to give our reflection and quote. But before we do that, respectfully, out of so many souls and people that have lost their lives for the senseless gun violence in our country, myself and our guests, we want to just honor those that have lost their lives with a quick 21 seconds of moment of silence. Now we know there's so many more than 21 lives that has lost, and we don't have enough seconds to count and honor all of them, but we do want to honor everyone from Buffalo to Uvalde and all the other ones that's most recently that's taken place. Now, onto our show. We also like to start our show with a reflection, just a way to level set our discussion and what we're going to be talking about. And so based on the topic of energy and the best way of generating our energy, I found a fabulous quote by our former president, Barack Obama. And the quote is stated as such: "The path towards sustainable energy sources will be long. America cannot resist this transition. We must lead it." And that is President Barack Obama. And we on this panel believe that we need to lead our transition from an investor-owned utilities here throughout San Diego region or county to community-owned utilities, public power model that's going to be better for the people. Now, as we do on all of our shows, we like to give our S.U.N enlightenments. And our S.U.N enlightenments are inspired by one of our modern thought teachers, Donald Miguel Ruiz. And our S.U.N enlightenment starts as such: 1, be responsible for your resources. 2, take the state of our social, racial, and climate justice seriously. 3, don't wait for others, do your part. 4, and when you do it from a very loving, peaceful, and passionate place. Before I get started into our topics, I want to give a disclaimer, and that the commentary and information on S.U.N Sustainable Urban Network is not an endorsement by the Protect Our Communities Foundation or KNSJ, rather personal views of those that are on the show. And in addition to that, we want to let those that are joining maybe for the first time to understand what is S.U.N all about. Well, we believe with our collective, unified, forward-moving progression that we could provide information that can enhance our lives, improve our lifestyles, in addressing our social, racial, economic justice, and equity through the lens of environmental and climate justice. And we do believe that collectively that we can scale up our neighborhoods by using equity as our model in moving forward. Now, what's happening? What's the latest? What's going on? Well, I don't know if you guys heard about it, but here in San Diego 350, they organized a protest in front of investor-owned utilities, Sempra headquarters. And there was some very bold and courageous individuals that literally blocked the doors of the parent company, which is Sempra, from anyone being able to come in or go out. There was media coverage, and there were speakers, of course, on that as well. Now, who is shining? I would say our legislators that are willing to stand up for gun violence. All of those are pushing forward to make sure that we have sensible gun reform. I am giving them the Sunshine Award. And the fossil shade definitely goes to all of those that actually, all those mass shooters. I don't even want to give their names any clout, but I want to say that they definitely get the fossil shade. Now, on to our guests. So before we hear from this fabulous guest and before I introduce them, we're going to hear a little bit more of our Sun theme song to kind of put us in that groove about the energy and why we're here and the work that we're doing.
Clean energy matters. Fossil fuel not flatters. Rooftop solar in the mix is really good for the streets. Electricity needs a big rate relief. We gon' keep it pushing.
All right, that was like perfect.
Watch the show.
So we believe that rooftop solar is a great solution for our communities. It would benefit us, and it's a way to literally dismantle an institution that's done a lot of harm to many of us in our community. So who do we have today on our panel? We have Ms. Karinna Gonzalez. She is a policy manager with Hammond Climate Solutions. We also have Mr. Bill Powers. He is a renowned energy expert, professional engineer, not just here locally throughout our county or state, not just in the country, but he has been an expert witness throughout the world in many different countries. We also have Dr. Darwin Fishman. He is a professor in the social science topics and subjects, including public poli-sci. Like, how did I stop on that? And he's also the co-founder of the Racial Justice Coalition here in San Diego. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today on this topic. And
thank you.
Yes. And so, Karinna, I would like to start with you. Do you have any more that you want to, share about your background, and why is a public power community on utilities really important to you? And why are you in this work that you're doing? Hi, are we back, guys?
Yes.
Okay. I apologize on that. And hopefully the recording is still in progress.
It was only interrupted for a few seconds, I think.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Karinna, for sharing. Did you want to continue?
No, that's okay.
Okay, great. So I would like to ask Mr. Bill Powers himself, why is energy justice so important to you? You have really taken this mantle on many different levels. A lot of people don't even realize that you are an intervener, and you intervene on behalf of ratepayers here throughout the state of California, not just SDG&E customers, but against all of the investor-owned utilities in California. Can you share with us why this work is so important to you?
Yes. My day job is an engineering consultant. For decades, I've worked on power systems of all types, including solar energy systems. And what got me really going down this road, toward equity, is the energy crisis of 2000, 2001. I thought the electric utility was a mom and pop operation. I mean, they just go to work, they do their job, and they deliver a service. But the amount of corruption that was exposed in that debacle of that energy crisis really motivated me to get much more engaged, working with nonprofits, working before commissions. And it was obvious from almost day one that a simple, elegant, equitable solution is rooftop solar and batteries. I put rooftop solar and batteries on my home in 2001 as a response to the energy crisis. And have been amazed at how hands-off, reliable, and equitable in the sense that everyone can have access to it. And getting fast forward into these commission proceedings is that I have seen how the electric-owned utilities, in this case, you mentioned Sempra. Sempra is the parent company of San Diego Gas and Electric. It's the parent company of Southern California Gas. I've seen how the parent companies and the investor-owned utilities dominate the political scene, both locally and at the state level, and that it's very hard to move the needle in the current format, that they have too much political clout to allow a simple, equitable, extremely reliable approach to be the lead step. And so that has definitely led me to a much greater interest in the city of San Diego becoming a public utility where we gain control. Just because we gain control doesn't mean we're going to have a great system. That's another step that goes beyond that. But that until we have control of the system, we're really almost spectators and fighting a constant defensive battle. And I prefer to go on offense. That's, to me, public power is offense.
I like that. Thanks a lot for sharing some of your background and what motivated you. I remember you sharing that crisis that, again, it motivated you, but I think it's great for all of our listeners to know that. And Dr. Darwin, I mean, you're down for public power. You believe, power to the people. So can you kind of give us some insight of why you support a community-owned utilities model such as public power for our electricity and why this is important to you?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for inviting me, Sonja. I'm happy to be included again. And I'm, sort of always the odd one out. I'm not an energy expert, and my main area of focus, especially since I've been here in San Diego the last 9 years, has been on criminal justice issues. But as you know, I'm one that's really feels very strongly about intersectional approach. But I think also in the environmental movement, we need to talk about like this holistic approach, which is, yes, I'm working on criminal justice. I'm concerned every day as a Black man about police shooting me. I'm also concerned when I come home every day about electricity and power, especially with the bills being the highest, and then learning not just the highest, but the highest really in California and the US, our energy rates. And I think the thing is, and it's that the connecting point for me is that notion about democracy, having control over our lives. And it's just extraordinary that we went through this process where supposedly elected officials supposed to represent us and our interests. And things like having lower energy rates should be something like elected officials protect us. It's just extraordinary to see how quickly they sell us out. And then not only do they give, SDG&E a sweetheart deal, but that we're literally slammed with rate increases. It's mind numbing. And then they want to get elected again. So, for communities of color, if we're already mostly working class and poor folks in terms of San Diego, in terms of income, the rates are disproportionately hurting us. If it's up $25, $50, that's a huge impact on us. And we have to, in that sense, be our own best advocates. And the last part I just want to say, and it's going to connect back to Bill's, the technical part. We also, as much as I appreciate the importance of the rate card, because this gets into the power, public power, we also have to figure out different models. In that sense, if we're not being well served by this private company, and we've been doing this for years, then we really have to be open to other approaches. And that's not some communist boogeyman. It's really is as simple as, if this is not working for us, we can't just accept the labels that anything alternative is just going to be evil and impossible, but we have to believe that there are better approaches that can serve us. Not only provide, greener energy sources, but also give us lower rates. And so that's how I come at this.
No, I really appreciate that, because what you're saying literally is you're giving like a real case study example of what energy burden is, right? And so that's one of the reasons why I personally got involved in energy justice many, many years ago, even advocating for our community choice energy. You know, I grew up with my dad always saying, one choice is no choice. You always have a choice in everything you do, right? And so knowing that choices is what drives our, as consumers, right? It's supposed to be our benefit as far as driving prices down for us, and not just having a monopoly and being chained to what they say or do. And so just for our listeners, just kind of give them a quick definition of what energy burden is. Energy burden is part of like when a percentage of a person's household of their income and how much they spend on home energy. And so if you're spending more than like 6% of your income is going on your energy bill, then that's considered energy burden. And if you're actually, spending, 10% or more, that is actually considered severe energy burden. And so, Karinna or Bill, did you want to make any comments either on that or something else?
Yeah, I can chime in here. I think the definition that you gave is perfect. It really, Black and brown communities are experiencing a lot of energy burden right now. A disproportionate amount of their income is going towards energy bills. And this is an issue that touches everybody, right? It becomes an equity issue when you have to figure out, are you going to pay your rent or are you going to pay your energy bill? And in San Diego, this is a big issue. 1 in 4 San Diegans can't afford to pay their SDG&E bills. And there are people with medical conditions that need electricity to run medical equipment, that need refrigeration for their medications. And so this really is a big issue. And I think a lot of times energy, seems like it's, not a lot of people are focused on energy or learning about energy justice, but this is really an issue that a lot of San Diegans are facing right now. SDG&E rates have increased 48% since 2013. And when you compare it to the rest of the investor-owned utilities in California, you can really see that not only that we're paying the highest, but also the rates have inflated a lot more quickly than the rest of the investor-owned utilities. And so that is really a big reason in itself for pushing for public power.
I'm so glad you said that, because it kind of transitions into a question I have for Bill. And that is, if the investor-owned utilities, they're supposed to generate their income from transmission and distribution, which we know we fight that as well, and we're going to bring that into this too. He schooled me a lot, y'all, on this transmission and distribution, which I appreciate. So why are they so incentivized, if you will, to continuously go to the California Public Utilities Commission and ask for rate increases on electricity, when in actuality, or technically, they're only supposed to get their revenues coming from transmission and distribution? Can you give us some insight of why they have such an incentive to continuously ask for rate increases?
Yes. And so that the game that we're playing now is, for decades, really from the dawn of investor-owned utilities, which is over a century ago, the system was in continuous expansion. Like California had a population of a few million people, and say a century ago, now we've got nearly 40 million. So there's expansion. But about, say, 15 years ago, because a lot of it was due to energy efficiency, people being more conscious of how much power they're using, and California being a leader in the nation in energy efficiency measures, that growth just flatlined about 2004, and it's actually declining somewhat now. Well, that was the basis for building more power plants, building more transmission lines, building more distribution systems. And the way that their monetary reward is set up is they get paid profit on capital investment that they make. So if they build a new power plant,
Guaranteed, right?
guaranteed 10, 12%, which for those folks who are listening that know something about finance, even the big boys struggle to get 10 to 12% return year after year on their money. And so that's the kind of return you get on a high risk investment. This is a no risk business. We are captive customers of the utility. And so a whole nother debate, and could be another show, is these huge rates of return that the utilities get for a no risk business. But so things started changing 15 years ago. Growth flatlined. Shortly after that, peak load flatlined, starting to go down. Peak load is the reason for putting in more peaker gas turbines and that type of thing. What's happened over the last, especially the last 5 years or so, is the utilities, as I see it, they're constantly gaming out what's the next big moneymaker. Things are changing. How do we stay on top of this? They know that rooftop solar and battery storage is bad news, because that's basically allowing every customer to become an independent power generator with 100% clean energy. And so they've targeted rooftop solar as it's really the antithesis of their business model. I mean, if the business model doesn't change, they've got to stop rooftop solar. And it's that simple. And in the meantime, here in California, we've had fire after fire after fire, billions of dollars worth of destruction, people dying, homes getting burned. Most of it due to utility negligence. Again and again and again, it's utility negligence. It's happened here in 2007. We had 3 utility-caused fires. And what happens at the Utility Commission, which is so counterproductive, is there's a disaster caused by the utilities, like the fires, and then we award them fantastic amounts of money to build new stuff, in theory, to reduce the risk of fire. And so one of the
But they're the ones that's causing the fires, or some of the fires.
Right. I mean, in effect, they're rewarded for their own negligence and their own failure to keep on top of the equipment. And in this case, and this is really for Darwin and Karinna and Elijah as well, and the listeners, is that I'm on the board of Protect Our Communities Foundation. You are our lead organizer and program manager for that program. And we at this organization for a dozen years at the commission have said, cheaper, better system is there's only 30,000 meters out there. We can put rooftop solar and battery on, we can put batteries on all of them. We can put rooftop solar on most of them. And if we do that, you don't have to invest hardly a dime in your transmission and distribution system. When you shut it off, they're on their own power, completely reliable. I mean, that's been our mantra for a dozen years. As usually, the utilities pick it up, but at a very small level. Like I said, sure, we'll do that with 300 homes, not with all 30,000 homes. And so what we're facing now is a rate increase of about 50% over this decade. We're already the highest in the nation. We're about to leave that in the dust and be double highest in the nation. And much of the reason for it is we are going to underground vast amounts of lines going to 10 customers, 20 customers. I mean, mindless expense, massive expense, when for pennies on the dollar, we can just, and probably 20% of them have solar already. I mean, they're people who live in the backcountry that are fire exposed are aware that being able to go onto their own power systems is a benefit. So there's a higher percentage of folks in the backcountry who are already good to go if those lines are shut down, which is part of the technique. So I'm getting a little in the weeds here, except to say that the utilities, one of their most distinguishing characteristics is making lemonade out of lemons that they cause, like the fires, turn that into something big. And another area that all of us are working in directly or indirectly is, why would they be so adamant about building solar and wind far away from where it's used? Well, the reason is simple, is that their part of that deal is to build transmission lines. Transmission lines are the top revenue generator for the utilities. And so, I mean, this all sounds pretty straightforward. And this isn't tough to understand. But you would think it was rocket science at the commission. I mean, the commissioner is being befuddled by how complex all this is. It's not complex. It's simple. I mean, you just follow the money and it's clear what's going on, but there's no political will, or very little, to change the bow of the boat.
And I think some of that political will, I kind of saw that firsthand. Well, I think we all have, because Darwin even brought it up, is that the investor-owned utilities often are contributors to these political campaigns, right? And so unfortunately, it's like you can accept someone's money, but that doesn't mean that you have to necessarily vote in favor of their position, because by definition, that would be considered corruption, right? So unfortunately, I think that's kind of what's happening. So definitely want to kind of discuss this a little bit further, but I also want to hear from Karinna on, can you kind of give our listeners an idea of what energy inequity means, or energy equity? Like, can you give us a good framework around energy inequity?
Yeah, so I mean, when we talk about energy equity, we really are, we're talking about the burden of paying your electricity bill, the income burden. And we're also talking about the climate injustices that these IOUs are perpetrating, right? So we see that Black and Brown communities of concern are at the front lines of the climate crisis, and these fossil fuel companies are continuing to exacerbate that climate crisis. We see fracking in people's backyards in Kern County and low-income communities, and these communities are also facing the long-term health effects of the dirty energy that these companies are extracting and are continuing to use. And so it really is, all of these things tie together: social justice, climate justice, and we really want to see, a transition away from the IOU, the investor-owned utility model altogether. We have seen that it doesn't work, as Darwin mentioned. It's not working. There are better models that are out there that will not only alleviate the income burden, the energy burden, the health burden, the climate burden. And so we have seen that this investor-owned utility model isn't working. We want to transition to something that's better, that works better for our communities.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And Darwin, did you want to chime in on energy equity and kind of how that kind of sits with you and why this is important to you as well?
Right. Yeah, and it's a really useful term, way to think about in terms of equity, because you can also even, if you extend it out, of course, include the political system. It's also the equity in terms of relationship with elected officials. If you don't have as much access or much say about who your elected officials are, and you look at things like financial contributions, and you want to compare that to say what SDG&E is giving your politicians, then your voice, you don't have it. You're not, in that sense, literally going to be setting the rates for how much you pay. It's a really daunting task. And then, again, you can also really get into the weeds on the political side, because ultimately it was not just someone with the Democratic Party that hurt us the most. Was we went through the whole part with SDG&E and the contract and renewal, but it was also someone Latinx from a predominantly migrant immigrant community. They're also more susceptible to the equity debate in terms of the resources they have to be able to run for office coming from things like the corporations. So in that sense, it is that deep. It's a lot of layers we've got to work through if we are going to get at things like environmental equity. And we have to really shine a light on that, because my experience has been, and this has been kind of the difficulty we've had with connecting the environmental movement in some respects with Black and Brown communities, is this purity of the issue, like just looking at energy and the public power part, but not enough emphasis meeting people where they're at in terms of the struggle on things like paying bills. And we really saw that play out in our movement here on the ground. And I think a lot more work has to be done on that, because, quite often folks just think that that's too abstract, like having these pure sources or cleaner energy sources. when we're looking at, thinking about how do I pay my monthly bill? And there are ways that we can rectify that. 'Cause it's not necessarily this extensive gap, but it's certainly the narrative that gets played out for us. So I think those terms are really useful ways to discuss it and help to connect those dots.
Yes, and I appreciate you sharing that. I know that you and we collaborated, was it like last year, on a forum that was a city official, and we discussed this option here, this same topic we're talking about now, public power, community-owned utilities, as a viable option. And so I do think that in some places that what I found really interesting is that it looks like a lot of our progression, if you will, or progressive movement starts, and you probably heard me say this, Darwin, like in Northern California, right? You and I've had these discussions, and it seems like it filters down to round about LA, Los Angeles. But where San Diego sits, it's almost like San Diego's like in its own island. And a lot of those progressive movements, so for some reason, just hasn't historically always reached down to our area. So when we're looking at progressive topics such as, what we're talking about now, it's like, oh, but this is what we've always had, or the sky is not going to fall. If anything, you're going to have more disposable income now, right? Instead of having to be, price gouging by the investor-owned utilities. So no, I think that's a really great point. And Bill, I just want to kind of hear your thoughts on what we're talking about, or even, I just also look at the time of use. I just see like, it's just like the large corporations, right? And their shareholders is just like really gouging the everyday working person. And so knowing the demographics, even in San Diego, we know that it's not just affecting the Black and brown communities, it's affecting working families, right? So San Diego, for some that may not know, we are the least affordable place to live in the country. In 2014, we were the second least affordable place to live in the country. In 2017, we were also #1, least affordable place to live. It doesn't mean the most expensive, but it means the cost of living, right? The affordability issue. And so how much you're paying for your rent, how much you're paying for your electricity bill. Again, the reason why I've been getting in this fight is to try to help relieve that affordability issue. So, and overall addressing our climate crisis while we're doing it, hopefully. Yeah. Bill, did you want to talk about even, I know there's like a bill, I think it's Assembly Bill 327 that talks about the PUC kind of needs to adopt the NEM policy to ensure that solar is equitably distributed to like disadvantaged communities. Did you want to even kind of share some of your thoughts on either our legislation with that and why rooftop solar is beneficial and how we can kind of control it better with having a public power model?
Yeah, I'll do it. I'll at least hit on 2 or 3 of those, and then we'll keep rolling. But just to follow up on what Darwin was saying about rates and people paying their bills, and one of the issues that has come up. So the Protect Our Communities Foundation, we're a party in this proceeding at the commission, which is working out a new tariff for net metering for rooftop solar. And we're also in another proceeding there at the commission, which is the clean energy financing. And what we're focusing on is, in some ways, the way I would characterize what's happening in those proceedings is that the utilities have taken on their claim that they're helping lower income customers by gutting net metering is kind of a twist on that old expression, a rising tide lifts all boats. I would say that their pitch is an ebb tide sinks all boats, and that's equity. The lower income aren't going to have it, and neither are the well-to-do. We are going to undermine it completely. And in a context of their approach, that there are financing tools that make solar just as available to renters, people with poor credit, all those folks that are tough, who have problems getting financing or just don't own the property where the solar would go in. There are straightforward tools that are being used in some cases in California and other states to do that. The utilities have opposed these. And so in this case, the obvious benefits across the spectrum, lower income, upper income, rooftop solar and batteries, is using, frankly, all that money that they distribute to nonprofit organizations around the state, especially black and brown community organizations. They have called in chits in this net metering fight. And so we have like 150 people of color community organizations saying rooftop solar under the current tariff is bad for the people that they represent. And so it's a pretty cold-blooded transaction. And so I guess to shift away from the negative, we're doing the best we can. Hats off to California Solar and Storage Association, to Hammock Climate Solutions here in San Diego, to be pushing so hard to make it tough for the state and for the elected officials to duck this one. I mean, those efforts are going toward trying to make the political establishment own it. You know, if NEM is cut back substantially. So shifting away from that defensive comment, public power. So all of us that are your guests today, we've been working on this public power issue for a while and have come to the determination that, I mean, if the commission is telling us the rates are going to go up at least 50% over the next 7 or 8 years, it's just completely out of control, meaning the utilities and their holding companies clearly own the state and can just mandate we're going to jam these rates through the roof and there's not much you can do about it. And so we've advocated for public power. It's on paper, it's simple that the city council can simply make the determination with a supermajority vote. We're going to do this. The courts will adjudicate between the city and the utilities what it's worth, and we buy it, and we're public power. It sounds simple, but that process has been presented as almost insurmountable. And just a very recent development, which is good for morale for those of us that are pursuing public power, is that there is a small jurisdiction irrigation district in the Central Valley, South San Joaquin Irrigation District, that has been engaged with Pacific Gas and Electric for years about separating from them, forming their own public power utility, buying the wires. That's the big deal. You need to buy the transmission and distribution system within your physical jurisdiction. And at that point, you're a public utility. You own the wires, you control the system, power flows. And PG&E fought them tooth and nail, but in late March of this year, the California Supreme Court denied PG&E's final appeal and authorized South San Joaquin to enter into those negotiations to determine the price, buy the wires, and get started. And I say that because it's been somewhat hypothetical over the last few years. And we want to do this, we want to do this. It hasn't been done in a while, but it's being done right now in real time in California with a decision now at the Supreme Court that really backs communities that want to do this. So this is good news. I mean, and this is something that we should be working with this year to make public power to build on that development, because this is happening all over the country where people are just getting fed up with, clearly the rates are going up because the corporations are turning around and providing more and more benefits to shareholders. I read their quarterly reports and their PowerPoints to investors. And it's really, those PowerPoints are about how do we squeeze more blood from the stone? How do we get more money out of this corporation? It is not a kumbaya mindset. And we're looking for that kumbaya mindset.
Yeah, I have to definitely, I agree with you. And to your point, even about, the Black and brown communities where they're saying the current state is against them, it is unfortunate, right? Because we're the ones suffering, right? Most of the, Black and brown communities are currently, suffering under any model that they've had. They raise our rates. We have less disposable income because we're having to pay more because of the energy burden. And electricity should be a right and not a privilege. And so, and even from the fossil fuel burning, right? So even when we're looking at Southeast San Diego, their air quality was like D minus, right? And so for a long time, and yet I just think it's unfortunate that they somehow were able to convince some that they're actually on their side, but yet they have been, you know, the perpetrator for, too many years and counting. And so I, man, you just kind of wish that people can just open their eyes and not have them wide shut and really see that the same ones that's been dogging our communities and been hurting us financially and even in our, health, justice, and everything else are not our ally. So I just had to say that because you made that point. And, and another example of that is how they changed the time of use that used to be during the business hours, where the large, institution corporations would absorb the highest peak rates, throughout the day. And then they shift that to on the backs of everyday working families, that now the time of use is when you're at home after work. And so now the everyday working families is having to absorb, the most cost when they're at home trying to spend time with their families, cooking, washing laundry and dishes, and getting their family prepared for the next working day or school day. Yeah. So Karinna, or anyone, did you want to just chime in?
Sure. Jump in. Let me. I want to add another issue to this about for working class, poor folks, and people of color. The other one that we got, I think, it's really key. We haven't touched on, of course, is the union part, and that also gives me an opportunity to say, coming from Northern California in Davis, I was raised with SMUD, so the Sacramento Municipal Utility District and public power there wasn't directly have it, but my friends and people I knew in Sacramento had that. It's union, it's lower rates. I mean, we knew that even just comparison with Davis. So I think part of it is, again, what's amazing is that we're not exposed to that kind of basic information. I mean, we literally had to go through a whole struggle about if we get public power here in San Diego, that it would be anti-union, would be a union shop, and they'd all lose their jobs. And it's just the nuttiest stuff, but we have to go through that. And, that step-by-step explaining it. And it gets back to the whole thing about the equity justice. Part of it is who control, of course, the airwaves and can get the narrative out. It just always felt like we were on the defensive, like we had to keep demystifying these myths. And it's really frustrating because so many people were dealing with inaccurate information. And which means that, again, it's not just the purity of the cause and the issue, but we have to take things like the media seriously, union seriously, like all these different things are interconnected that have to be part of our struggle if we're going to be successful.
One comment on the union issue, which is a big deal here, is that the collective labor agreement, but collective bargaining agreement that IBEW has with SDG&E has a loyalty clause in it. And IBEW has been clear on that we're basically handcuffed to those folks, that we have to be loyal to whatever their objectives are. I mean, frankly, I think that the union really bargained away quite a bit when they allowed a loyalty clause to that type to be in there. But I think we have to put some more effort on just pointing out that they are highly restricted in acknowledging the obvious, which is the same local serves the public power utility of Imperial Irrigation District. I mean, it's the same local. They're a union, they're a public power entity. There's no issues with, in fact, that any public power entity in San Diego would almost certainly be union. I mean, and so I agree with you, Darwin, that it's like that throwing out all of this stuff that with a little bit of time and review doesn't hold water, but it gets out ahead of the argument, it gets in the newspaper, and these non-issues tamp down the enthusiasm and the political will to move on it.
Yes, I agree. And Bill, you and I know in different spaces, but we both were advocates for our community choice energy here locally. And so I know that that's where I experienced that direct opposition, from some of those union brothers and sisters on that particular topic. And we have our community choice energy now, right? I mean, we have 2 within our county, at least 2. And then I know Orange County also, they've starting to go live as well. So there's quite a few, even though, and I share that as an encouragement, like just because, you get some opposition, that doesn't mean you stop fighting
Right.
to fight for it, right? And so when they were opposing the investor-owned utilities, SDG&E was opposing our community choice energy, as well as our union brother and sisters was opposing our community choice energy. And so now they're both on board. Karinna, I think you wanted to share something.
Yeah, just going back to the comment that you made, Sonja, about how it's really ironic that we see these big climate justice and energy justice and social justice organizations coming out on the side of the utilities in cases like this net energy metering proceeding. It's really, the utilities have worked overtime to protect their profits. That's what it all comes down to, is the utilities see rooftop solar as a threat to their profit. And so they have really put out this narrative that solar hurts communities of concern, Black and Brown communities, and have successfully gotten these organizations, these environmental justice organizations, to come out in support of what the utilities have said. But the real narrative is that rooftop solar decreases costs for everybody. If you have solar, if you don't, it decreases costs, because going back to what Bill was mentioning about the transmission and distribution, it decreases the amount of transmission and distribution that we need, which we pay for because SDG&E charges ratepayers to build that infrastructure. And so it's going to decrease rates for everybody, but the utilities have really controlled the narrative, especially in this net metering proceeding, which is why, locally Hammond Climate Solutions has been working and has been successful at getting 50 plus organizations to sign on in support of rooftop solar, and as well as 6 cities locally. The mayor of San Diego has come out. And so we're really seeing momentum build up here, but it's definitely been an uphill battle.
Yes, thank you for pointing that out, Karinna. And I totally agree. And so sometimes it's like we need to take a step back and look at, there's another model, right? And so another model oftentimes requires an adjustment to your paradigm. So it's like, well, you think that is hurting, but in actuality, they will have more disposable income, right? And so if I have more now disposable income, now I can spend more money at your gala, right? Or I can spend more money, recirculating my more money, more disposable income throughout the community, and purchasing, and that exchange of purchasing and buying things. So it is just like, you got to look at things sometimes just from a wider lens and not more narrow. And I think this is one of those topics where it's like, look at it from a different paradigm here that is actually beneficial for all of us. As you mentioned, I agree with you. Yeah. Bill, your thoughts on it?
Oh, I think just following up with what Karinna was saying about organizing support locally, I think that it's hard to do. It's hard because people have many different balls in the air all the time, and it can be tough to get them to focus on one thing. But when you can get them to focus on that one thing, if they can sustain it even for a little while, it can make a big difference. Like and this is probably more for the listeners than for those of us that are on the show today, is that it was with the George Floyd, killing of George Floyd, for a little while, the country was fully focused on that. And it made a big difference. And in a certain sphere of California, especially California, Solar and Storage Association, but also political friends and regional groups like Hammond Climate Solutions have been able to mobilize enough public pushback with enough press and enough noise that it's keeping the state from dropping the hammer on net metering. And so to me, it's a pretty impressive demonstration of if you can mobilize your issue, it doesn't have to be permanently, but enough to keep it up there, like we did with the franchise agreements, a year and a half ago. For a little while, I'd say a few months in San Diego, it was one of the big political issues of the day, those franchise agreements. And by the way, I have to put a pitch in on this. There are 2 active lawsuits on that issue. One of those is ours. They will be in court in November. So that's one of the reasons too for wanting to keep the public power issue alive, because we may have an opportunity that is much sooner than most people understand to move on that. But just to underscore that an amazing part of this net metering fight right now is that enough organizations have gotten the public enough engaged that they've neutralized for the moment the intent by the utilities to really undercut this. And so much bigger than just net metering is the power of organizing the public to rally makes such a difference when you can do it.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Bill. And I also want to let our listeners know that through that franchise, that we were also successful in getting a public power feasibility study. And so that public power feasibility study stayed quiet for, from last year. And then recently, we've been kind of edging and asking a lot of our very active residents to, contact their council members as well as the mayor and make sure that that feasibility study gets moving. And then in March, the RFP for the public power feasibility went out. I need to find out what status we're at now on that. But I want to say again, that had to do with our public comments, our public input to what we believe is in the best interest for the public, for the people. And so as we're talking about a public power community-owned utilities model, understanding, and then give props to Councilmember Joe LaCava, because he was the one who really carried the request to make sure that it was included so we can have that feasibility study so it can continually, as Bill mentioned, move forward and progress as far as the next steps in this process. Yeah.
Agreed.
Yeah.
And I just want to tie in how important the politics of all of this is. During the meetings for the franchise agreements for renewing SDG&E's contract, we really were able to see how SDG&E's influence played in there. And so there was a lot of really good organizations doing good work in the community that were calling in support of SDG&E, and doing some digging, find out that SDG&E gives them a grant every year. And so we have seen really how the investor-owned utilities and fossil fuel companies' influence has affected politics locally, statewide. And it's really important that voters get involved here and really look at who they're electing, and they're going to be the ones making these decisions to go to public power. And so we really need to pay attention what's happening locally with candidates. And I'll just say that a couple of organizations, climate organizations, have partnered to launch a fossil fuel free pledge, which candidates can take, and they pledge not to take SDG&E's money. And, this is to provide transparency to voters into who is taking SDG&E's money, who is really in their interest. And so we encourage people to go look at who has taken that pledge when they go to fill out their ballots in November.
That's a great point, because we did see some shifts in who was going to vote, how they was going to vote on the franchise. And so again, I agree. I think it's great not to take the money, but it's like, even if you, matter of fact, I was told, Micah, Bill just told me one of our elected officials took like $1,000. I was like, that's not even a lot of money. And his point was like, exactly. So why even take it? It's like, and so to my point is, one of our community members often referred to it as chicken dinners. It's like, yes, they do provide some contributions or grants, but this amount is not even a significant amount. It might be 1,000 here, 5,000 there. It's not even like a significant amount to sell out a whole community over, right? Like, it's like, at least make it appealing to some degree, have some respect on it. Don't be so, anyway, I won't go too far in that, but I think you guys got my point on that. Yeah.
Yeah, but Karinna brings up a good point. I mean, I would just add that, we have to also do a better job of explaining those connections, that we do have control over our energy bills and our source of energy. And here are the concrete ways that you can begin to take that over. Most people wouldn't even have thought that the franchise had anything to do with the rates that they pay on a monthly basis. So we have to go against that grain that's just telling that those are disconnected and it's not important. And especially the communities I work in, there was no sense that, in that sense, how big of a deal that franchise agreement was, and where their politicians sat on the issue and why.
But I mean, to our credit, Darwin, I know that you and I collectively, as well as some more of us, we did raise this issue in City Council Districts 4, 8, and 9. I mean, I was, given some positive feedback from our elected officials on that, as well as in community members, that if it wasn't for a lot of our advocacy work in those communities, they would have never known about this. So.
Right. When two of those three districts, in that sense, went with us. But I mean, I think there's more that could be done, in the sense that 4, 8, and 9 should have been the districts every day. Thousands of people should have been, swamping them with calls, demanding that their rates go down.
Well, I hear you. I think theoretically, but understanding the dynamics of those communities, as it was mentioned before, and I think it might have been Bill that said it, that people got so many other balls in the air in real life situations. So I can't necessarily put that full, I don't want to put that burden, on the communities, when I understand that when it is at least affordable place to live, how many maybe jobs you have to work just to try to, keep the ends, met for your life and for your household. So I hear what you're saying. But I also know that, we know the demographics there too. And so there's other elements, but I think that we did a good job in raising the issues that they were familiar with, that they didn't know, that they, we had a couple forums and town halls, should I say, in that, for those areas.
Oh, no, definitely. I'm putting more the thing as a challenge for organizers, that there's a lot more room. There's a lot more that.
I agree.
And to Darwin's point, some of these community members don't even understand that these issues are going to affect them directly. They don't understand that this one vote is going to lead to them paying hundreds of dollars more per month. It's going to lead to them choosing whether to pay their rent or pay their electricity bill. And so they don't know that these issues are even, that one vote is going to affect their daily lives so much. And that's why it's really important to get behind candidates that are going to speak for the people.
I totally agree with you. And so I think quantifying, I agree. And I know that I've inquired as well, quantifying what we're talking about, so it's more on a everyday, person's life. Because I think one of our community members mentioned that, like, those large numbers, which the value of that franchise was 20 billion, for a lot of people, is like they can't conceive that amount, right? They can conceive like how it affects them, as you mentioned, Karinna, in their everyday, like how much more are they going to probably end up having to pay in a year, in 2 years, in 5 years, and even within the time frame for that franchise. And Bill, do you want to give us our last thoughts as we wrap up?
I just want to concur with Darwin and Karinna that, I mean, it's really all about the politics now. I mean, it's continuing to organize. I know that we had a booth that you were manning at Earth Fair, and there were other booths nearby that were also collecting signatures for interested people, and we got collectively hundreds of people who expressed interest in public power, and we'll see how we can turn that into engagement. But there is a hunger for some different way of doing business. People that don't know anything about this field, people can generally smell when something is off. I mean, something isn't working, something is wrong. And so they understand that at a basic gut level. And I agree with Darwin that this next opportunity that I think we're going to get much sooner than we anticipated will be a big, we know that much more organizing is going to be necessary, much more tilling of the soil is going to be necessary if we're going to get a serious shot at this. So maybe we end this show with a challenge. I mean, we did a good job in 2020, 2021. It exposed a lot of the strategies of who will be our opponents, who will try and stop this. And so we need to take advantage of the lessons we've learned and just take it farther down the field, take it all the way down the field.
All right, thank you all for joining us today. Tune in next week with S.U.N Sustainable Urban Network.